out of control. Governments around the world are on alert because of the worst outbreak of the Ebola virus on record. There are accusations that there was no comprehensive global strategy to handle the spread of the disease. Why is that? And just how dangerous is Ebola for people globally? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. It is the worst Ebola outbreak in history. More than 700 people have died in West Africa since February. The three countries affected, Sierra Leone, Guinea and Liberia, are all taking steps to limit the spread of the disease, but there's no known cure. Sierra Leone's president has just announced a state of emergency, and Liberia has closed schools and asked people to stay at home. Al Jazeera's Stephanie Scowen reports now on what the Liberian government is doing to try to stop the spread of the Ebola virus.
These are the stringent protective measures that medics in Liberia have to undertake before they can treat Ebola patients. As the ones who must get close up in order to treat them, they're particularly at risk of infection. But now the fear of Ebola spreading to the wider community has forced the government to institute its own measures to protect the whole country. The President, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, has ordered the closure of all schools, a thorough cleaning process for all public buildings on Friday, and a 1 month's compulsory leave for all non-essential public sector staff.
It could be your community.
Speaking at a briefing by the World Health Organization last week, she emphasised how important it is for people to act responsibly.
Protect yourself. Listen to the health workers. Abide by the rules, believe it is real. Go out and carry the message to wherever you are.
Ebola is transmitted through infected bodily fluids. If a healthy person comes into close contact with a sufferer, they're at risk.
The most efficient way it's transmitted is when people are taking care of people who are infected and they get directly exposed to bodily fluids, particularly vomit and blood and diarrhea and feces. And that's really the way things are happening right now and why we're seeing such an explosion of cases.
And that's prompted the withdrawal of 340 Peace Corps volunteers in Liberia, Guinea and Sierra Leone. The possibility that air travel could help the virus cross continents is worrying Western governments. In Nigeria, health officials are monitoring those who came into contact with a Liberian man who died of Ebola in Lagos.
We've been meeting with the contacts based on the level of the contact they had, and we've been advising them on the very need for them to restrict their movement. And all of them have temperatures to monitor their body temperatures in the morning and in the evening. And then, of course, they all have phone contacts, and as well as our field surveillance officers monitoring the contacts.
But the man who first identified the virus in the 1970s believes that the risk of infection through casual contact is remote.
Spreading in the population here, I'm not that worried about it. I wouldn't be worried to sit next to someone with Ebola virus on the tube, as long as they don't vomit on you.
But in West Africa, the risk is higher. This is the worst Ebola outbreak ever recorded, and aid agencies say it is now out of control. Stephanie Scowen, Al Jazeera.
So, what is it that makes Ebola one of the most feared diseases in the world? Well, those unfortunate enough to catch it suffer horrific symptoms. At first, it can seem like a bad case of flu, vomiting, headaches, and fever. But as the disease progresses, it can mean bleeding from the eyes, ears and mouth, and victims can slip into a coma. There's no predictable pattern to Ebola outbreaks. In the 4 decades since the virus was discovered, scientists have been unable to find a cure or a vaccine. Apart from keeping patients hydrated, there's not even a standard treatment for the disease. Up to 90% of those who get Ebola in this latest outbreak in West Africa will not survive. Well, the headlines make for scary reading. What makes this particular outbreak so bad? Well, there are 5 strains of Ebola, and this particular one, the Zaire Ebola virus, has the highest death rate of all, up to 90%. But it's as much to do with where the outbreak is happening as the actual disease. In high-income countries, Ebola would most likely be quarantined and dealt with quickly. But the 3 countries that it's hit this time all have a lack of resources and poor health infrastructure. In the past, most outbreaks have been in rural villages where it was easy to isolate and contain, but now it's affecting urban areas, making it much harder to control. None of the countries has experienced an outbreak before, so they don't have the specialist knowledge to deal with it, and that's led to public distrust of government authorities and international health workers. All right, so let's bring in our guests for today. From London, we're joined by Dr. Ben Newman, virologist at the University of Reading. Also in London, Dr. Katie Geary, medical director at International SOS. But first, let's speak with Lewis Brown, who's Liberia's information minister. He joins us on the line from Monrovia. Minister Brown, thank you very much indeed for being with us on Inside Story. Is Liberia able to deal with this outbreak on its own, or does it need outside help?
Well, we certainly do need outside help, and thank you for having me. We need all the help we can get beyond financial contributions. We do need actual hands on deck. We need experts. We need sanitation experts. We need healthcare workers. We need experts who fought hemorrhagic fever. Of course, Ebola is one of its kind, but yes, we do need all the help we can get.
Okay, Minister, tell us what Liberia is doing to build public confidence in the government's response to this crisis.
First of all, as I speak to you, the President is just ending a meeting with members of the Interreligious Council. That is a group that houses all of the various religious persuasions in the country. We're sharing with them information, but at the same time, we're increasing the level of awareness and sensitization. Obviously, some of the preventive measures will violate some long-held traditional practices and religious beliefs. But these are things that must be done if we are to contain, which is the overall strategy, to contain this virus, to care for the afflicted, and to protect healthcare workers, local and foreign, and at the same time, hopefully, to report no new disease in the shortest possible time.
And how seriously are people in the region taking the threat of this disease now?
I will suggest very seriously because yes, we're getting contributions. A near fatal incident, we hope not much will come out of it, involve one of our own natives who travel out of here to Nigeria. So the possibility of moving the virus across the region and probably around the world is a real possibility. But at the same time, this weekend, on tomorrow, the Liberian president will join the presidents of Guinea and Sierra Leone, 3 of the most affected countries, if you will, in a meeting in Conakry to explore what additional measures we can take together.
Okay.
We are clearly enjoined in this fight, and we must continue to share information and resources.
Minister, one final question. Was your government prepared for this outbreak? There have been outbreaks in the region before, of course, but did it catch you off guard?
Well, I'm not sure that any country like ours can really be prepared for an outbreak like this. An outbreak which attacks the way of life of that people have had over centuries. But at the same time, when you consider that at least 2 of our countries are still in the business of recovering from protracted conflict, which witnessed the level of destruction, not just to infrastructure, but also to public health facilities. We certainly could not be prepared for this. And experts tell us the fact that it is now roaming in highly populated areas, including urban centers, makes this outbreak especially unprecedented.
Minister, good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for your time, sir. That's Lewis Brown, Monrovia's Information Minister. Let's bring in then our two doctors, Dr. Ben Newman and Dr. Katie Geary in London. Ben, the question that anyone outside of West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa wants answered at the moment is how much of a threat does this disease pose to them?
I suppose there's been a lot of talk about this virus, and the word threat does come up quite a bit. But it's not really a very threatening virus from a virological perspective, looking at the science. It's a very fragile virus, and a virus that's actually fairly difficult to pass from one person to another. It doesn't fly through the air, it can't be spread the way a cold can be spread. And as it's been said, you wouldn't necessarily catch the virus from sitting next to somebody on a public transport or even on an airplane.
So it doesn't have the potential to spread like a flu pandemic?
No, flu just moves so much quicker, and flu can actually get out in front of the global health response, the public health response. But this is a virus that's actually ideally suited to being contained by a good public health response.
So why the fear surrounding it? Is it just the severity, the gruesomeness of the symptoms? And, of course, the eventual outcome.
It is an awful virus if you catch it. Yes, yes. And I suppose that's what's driving the fear. Now, the other reason why it's spreading right now is essentially fear of the doctors and the aid groups who are coming in to fight this. And that fear is probably unfounded, but that's really what's the issue right here.
Okay.
And it's good to see that the Liberian government are being so forthright, so open about their response to this.
Dr. Geary, Katie, your organisation works with governments and health authorities right around the world. Are they prepared to deal with it, or is there a sort of an attitude that, well, this is a West African problem, it doesn't really concern us?
No, not at all. What we're seeing and what we're experiencing is heightened interest globally. I think everybody is looking towards their own plans to see how prepared they are. They are showing great sympathy for the West African countries that are so significantly affected, and are stepping up their aid and support, whether that's through provisions or through medical personnel, in fact, out to that region. But no, they're taking it very seriously as an international global problem, not a Africa-centric problem.
So what is your organisation advising people who maybe have to travel to West Africa in the near future? What precautions do they need to take?
Absolutely. One of the key empowering features about control is that individuals potentially at risk understand how they can minimise the risk of exposure, how the virus may then be transmitted, and what they need to do if they perceive that they're developing symptoms. So our information and our support to our clients and members has been very much centred about that, making sure that they are fully aware of the extent of the outbreak and the areas covered, but also making aware of those specific individual and group activities that they can take to protect themselves from exposure and therefore risk of developing the disease.
Katie, you heard the Liberian Information Minister. You heard what Ben was saying about this being a virus that is that's particularly suited to being contained. Just how do you go about containing a virus like this?
Okay, so the principles of control and containment stand fast for every single disease. The key things you need to know is how it's passed, and we certainly know that Ebola is transmitted through contaminated bushmeat and also through body and blood, so body fluids and blood. So you know how it's transmitted, which means that you know that you can implement a barrier. When you know how it's transmitted, the next thing you need to know are the early signs, because those early signs will then give you an opportunity to, if you like, ring-fenced around that case to identify anybody else who may be contacted, exposed through their contact. And so the aim of that is to get one step ahead of the transmission of the disease. The third part for that then is to make sure that you've got good health surveillance that's sophisticated and coordinated, so that should you get the disease in one area, you can make sure that other areas are aware that this disease is around, and that you can then make sure that the health community is empowered and informed so that they can respond appropriately.
Okay, Ben, you're a virologist. This must be absolutely fascinating for you. A couple of technical questions then. Why has this particular outbreak been so deadly? Is it the strain or the environment in which it's taken hold?
This is a question a lot of other virologists would like to have the answer to, I think. So, as it turns out, a virus like this is very difficult to study in the laboratory. You have to have extraordinary precautions to be able to work with this virus, and there are very few places in the world where you even can work with it. So, when there's an outbreak in a field like this, right now the first priority is obviously stopping the outbreak, but there will be samples collected along the way, and in a couple of years' time some very interesting science will come out of this that will really help us to better understand how this virus works and what it is about it that makes it so dangerous.
Okay, it has a 90% mortality rate. Are you saying at the moment we still don't know why some people survive it while most don't?
Yes, and every time the virus emerges, it's a little tiny bit different. It's got a few different changes in it. And we don't know which of these are the ones that make it a better virus, make it a more severe virus. These are questions that really need to be answered so that we can help to understand what the future may hold.
Okay, is it a complex virus? Like, I mean, I know nothing. Forgive me, I'm completely ignorant when it comes to virology. But I'm imagining a virus like HIV would be quite complex. Whereas, what little I understand of the common cold or influenza, it mutates rapidly as it passes through society, and so it's more like influenza and flu, less like HIV.
Well, flu and HIV, from a virologist's perspective, are not that different. These are both viruses that do make a lot of mistakes, and so instead of getting just one virus, you get sort of a cloud of different closely related viruses that could be in a person at any one time. They're very fascinating viruses, but they're also very simple viruses. Take Ebola, and it only has 7 genes, sort of 7 little proteins that it can make, and everything that it does is somehow related to those. Compare that to a person, we probably have about 25,000 genes. The Ebola genes are fascinating. It's like opening up a toolbox and finding 7 tools you completely can't recognize or even fathom how they work. Very interesting science will eventually come out of this.
Fantastic. Katie, if there were to be an outbreak of this strain in the developed world, as opposed to rural Africa where it is right now, would the survival rate, do you think, improve, or do we just don't have the information we need about the virus to judge that?
No, I think you're correct, and as Ben has said, we're not totally sure what differentiates those that survive from those that don't. What we do know is that you have an increased chance of survival if actually you have early supportive care, because there's no cure as such. And so we know that if you're going to become ill within a sophisticated and developed and well-resourced health system, you're much more likely to get early intervention, and therefore we would expect that your survival rate would be higher. I think the key issue actually is that should we get a case of Ebola in the developed world, what we won't see is that rapid risk of transmission, and we won't see the huge number of cases from one single contact. And that's really because our health beliefs are slightly different. We have greater access to healthcare. The healthcare is resourced, and there is a good overall national surveillance and response planning that's gone into place to be there. So I think the big differential will be the attack rate, i.e. how many people are affected, rather than necessarily the overall survival rate.
Okay, I suppose that in a way is good news, because the question I'm about to ask is fuel for hypochondriacs everywhere. What are the symptoms? What's the incubation period, and how, as a medical professional, do you go about differentiating Ebola from influenza in its early stages?
Yeah, it's a very good question. In fact, you find that most tropical diseases present with a very similar set of symptoms, and that is a high temperature, sore throat, a headache, and aches and pains, joint pains. And as you so rightly point out, that is also what happens for the beginning of flu. With Ebola, then that quickly goes on usually to develop symptoms of diarrhea and vomiting, The disease course is usually about 2 weeks, and unfortunately then in the second week of your disease, that's when a lot of the internal damage is seen, and people will then start bleeding, and unfortunately most of them will die. The incubation period, and that is the time from your exposure to the time when you first show those symptoms, is somewhere between 2 days and 21 days. So it again makes it difficult to know exactly which exposure contact is going to have been significant for the disease process.
Ben, do we know where Ebola comes from? Is it a new virus, or is it something that's been in the environment for some time?
We don't know for certain, but we have some clues. So you can go out, and in the bat caves that run across a band in the middle of Africa, if you look in the bat guano, you can actually find little traces of this virus. And there are also traces of the virus in some other animals that are found in that region. So it seems to be out there in the forest in a number of animals. Now, as far as its history, we know about Ebola outbreaks going back 38 years right now. But we think the history of Ebola is much, much longer. There are something that we call molecular fossils, little pieces of Ebola, and you can find them in lots of bat and rodent genomes. And we think these probably date back at least 3 million years.
And do we know why these outbreaks occur then? Why, if it's been in the environment for as long as it has, why it would suddenly flare up?
We don't really know that, and that's something that gathering more Ebola sequences and a little bit more data might be able to help solve, yeah.
Okay, here's a question that, again, you might not be able to answer, but I'm going to put it to you anyway because I find it so fascinating. We talked about how Ebola can be contained if it should spread to more populated, developed areas of the world, and that's basically down to the medical systems that are in place, the efficient medical systems. But I just wonder what the environment, what impact the environment would have on the virus. How would it behave in cooler or more temperate climes?
The virus is only really active, only sort of alive, when it's inside of a warm living body, and all of our bodies here and in Africa are the same temperature, about 37 degrees. So presumably the environment wouldn't have much of an effect. You can, however, do tests. You can put the virus on, say, a sheet of metal, and you can see how long does this thing survive, just exposed to the air. You find out the virus is very fragile, it doesn't last very long, but it is preserved a little bit better by cooler temperatures. I doubt the difference in climate would be enough to make a significant difference in the way that the disease progressed.
Okay.
It would mostly be about our different attitude toward healthcare.
Okay. Katie, as I said, your organization works with health organizations, with governments around the world, and major companies as well. What impact economically do you think Ebola is going to have on the region at the moment? What is this outbreak going to cost Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone?
Yes, the absolute cost is clearly too difficult at the moment to predict.
I don't need you to give me a figure. I don't need you to give me a figure. No. We're not economists here, but I'm wondering in terms of human capital, in terms of impact on trade, yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we know that for other outbreaks of significant diseases or significant outbreaks, you've got a fourfold blow really to the economy of that country. First of all, you have the number of people who are normally working who are now no longer part of the workplace through sickness, caring for those that are sick, or unfortunately through death. We know that the softer side of social living, if you like, such as the environment, such as tourism and leisure time, that is also impacted as people tend to do less of that, and so that's another economic blow. We know that the area is rich in natural resources, and there's a lot of investment externally from international companies that goes on, and some of that will be less. And then there's the cost of actually treating the outbreak itself. So the country itself will now have to be responding to increased medical needs, increased resources, increased levels of personal protective equipment, looking at, unfortunately, additional facilities for burial, potentially for cremation, and so the true cost is much bigger than the actual cost to treat.
Well, let's hope that this current outbreak can be contained and that nobody else has to suffer these awful symptoms and succumb to this disease. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you, both of you, Ben Newman from the University of Reading and Dr. Katie Geary at International SOS. And thank you to Minister Lewis Brown, who we spoke to at the beginning of the programme. And thank you for watching. Don't forget, you can leave us your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or you can tweet us, as always, at AJ Inside Story on Twitter. In Doha, I'm Adrian Finnegan. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.